Hello guys, and today we are taking a couple minutes to introduce you to Adam Smith. Adam Smith is considered the founder of capitalism. Remember, if you look at your Quizlet vocabulary, Mrs. Keating gave you a simple definition of capitalism. Capitalism, and I would make this annotation if you don't not familiar of this. Capitalism is where you have private ownership, so that means individuals own the means of production. Means of production, if you go back and look at your Quizlet vocabulary, are those things needed to produce something. So, for example, the means of production, for example, at Disney World is the land that Disney is on. It is the actual roller coasters that people came to ride. Mickey Mouse could be a factor of production. So you have private ownership of the means or factors of production, and you also have consumers. Those are the people buying the goods, deciding what's produced. In a capitalist society, you're going to go by the law of supply and demand to set prices and decide what is going to be produced. If consumers don't want it, you're not going to make it. Capital is different from capitalism. Capital, folks, you need to remember, is that money we take and invest in a business. When I buy a stock, I am giving the company capital. Capitalism is the system that we are under today, and we're going to talk about with Adam Smith. Before we begin, I just want to review a couple things with you from your inventors of the Industrial Revolution. So you did the inventions of the Industrial Revolution, and we have the positive impact of industrialization. And as you can see, we have all of these. Standard of living, remember, if you look, those are by how people are judged, what they are doing. The idea that the people in industrialized nations will have access to clean water. They'll have access to better diets, health care, better homes. So you want to make sure that you understand these are the positive effects. The wealth of nations. As nations industrialize, they become wealthier, which is very important for the success of the nation. We have a large negative result of the Industrial Revolution. Not only when you first industrialized, you have a gap between rich and poor, but what's going to develop in the world is you're going to have a gap between those countries that industrialized and those non-industrialized countries. You still see that gap today. You look at a country like the United States, which is highly industrialized, and you compare it, for example, to a nation such as Egypt, for example. There are going to be different levels of wealth, and this gap will continue into the modern world. This need for raw materials, your factories need not only natural resources but raw materials, is going to encourage the Europeans to go out and to colonize the world. Imperialism, which we will take. And what will happen is they're going to be taking these raw materials from these poorer areas, but they are also these colonies will become, or these poor areas will also become markets for the goods that we are producing. So during the Industrial Revolution, you do have reforms, which you talked about yesterday. So what begins to develop is what is the role of government in the economy, and when you get there, does the government support workers? Do they regulate businesses? So this is where the new economic ideas come in, and we get Adam Smith. Remember, before this, before capitalism, most countries were working on that idea of mercantilism, where the government interfered in the economy. The government created monopolies. The idea was to protect wealth. Well, Adam Smith comes with a new idea. He's writing around the time of the Enlightenment. It's very interesting. The Wealth of Nations, which is Adam Smith's book, and the book that spells out the beginnings of capitalism, comes out in 1776, the same year as the Declaration of Independence. Laissez-faire is the idea that what you would do is you would have the government stays out of the economy at all, at completely. If the government will only hurt the production of wealth if it when it interferes. So the government should not be setting working hours. The government should not be setting working conditions. The government should not be um, putting safety regulations on consumer goods. They're staying out of the economy at all. The free market, free trade, not putting, for example, tariffs on goods to protect anything that anytime the government goes into the economy, they hurt it. Adam Smith believes that the government, yes, it needs taxes, but it should only be responsible to protect private property and for military protection. Everything else, even like schooling, doesn't come under laissez-faire because if you're requiring kids to go to school, you're taking them out of factory work. So, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Remember, he's working with the idea of the Enlightenment and this idea that people are reasonable. So with this, if I look at his Wealth of Nations, the idea that people work for their own best interest and competition forces people to make better products. Think about it. So, Apple has a phone. Apple's phones were small. Samsung comes out with a big screen. Well, Apple's like, we're competing with Samsung. Most people are buying the Samsung phones. We need to make a bigger iPhone. And then you get the iPhone 6, which is bigger, and the iPhone 6 Plus. So this happens all the time. The idea that I am working in my own best interest, and competition will force people to make better products. Also, if we follow the law of supply and demand, that will meet the economic needs of society. So, for example, have you ever noticed when it snows, snow shovels go out? Well, that's because people working for, if I'm in a business and I want to make money, I'm going to put snow shovels out in the winter when the snowstorm comes out. I'm not putting snow shovels out in July. Nobody's buying them. There is no demand. So as a result, what happens is I can meet everybody's demand, because what happens is when there's high demand, that causes prices to rise. Well, that makes businesses look and go, I need to increase the supply. As I increase the supply, prices go down. Best interest. We can fulfill all our needs. The government can, and when the government interferes, according to Adam Smith, it breaks this cycle, it hurts this economy. And we'll be doing some readings to explain this a little bit better in class. Now, one of the things that happens is when we have this, remember, the factory conditions are awful. Well, what happens, especially in Britain, where Adam Smith is writing, a lot of the factory owners are supporting Adam Smith's ideas. And then you get another writer, David Ricardo, and he comes up with the iron law of wages. And what he believes is if you increase the factory workers' wages, it will actually hurt the factory workers in the long run, because he believes that he thinks people are kind of selfish. So what he does is, if I increase the wages, that is only going to encourage workers to have more children. So in the short term, wages will rise, but in the long term, what you're going to do, labor supply over time will increase. You will get more and more and more laborers. Well, if the government makes these reforms, forces businesses to increase wages, it will actually hurt the working class because it will be increasing the labor supply. What he does not take into account, and one of the reasons his theory is incorrect, many workers were having their children go to work because they couldn't afford not to. So the economics of capitalism is to create individual wealth, the idea that everybody can get wealthy. You have private ownership, not government ownership. The law of supply and demand will determine what will be produced. So remember, if things are in short supply and high demand, prices rise. Increased supply, prices will lower. If demand is low, so for example, snow shovels in July, they're not going to make any money, so they're not going to sell those products. And any government regulation or interference in the economy hurts the economy. Government cannot interfere in working conditions, which will eventually, this theory, some of it we will keep, some of it we won't. But this is going to be a prominent economic theory that we are still dealing with today. And we are going to talk a little bit about that when I see you next class.